Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's a big one. Today we're finally going to be talking about the sophomore album from Hozier called Wasteland, baby. I vividly remember covering Hozier back in 2014. I remember knowing him only for Take Me to Church, a swampy soul song with a prominent overwritten goth streak to match his massive howling voice, owing some pretty obvious debts to old school blues and soul, but also showing an intuitive grasp of the textures in order to make it stick. In other words, there was no way in hell he wasn't going to become a one-hit wonder, especially in the mid-2010s where the mainstream was caught in transition between garage rock duos and rollicking indie folk flair and the overpolished pop rock that dominates right now. But you know what? I had some hope that his self-titled debut would connect for me, especially as his songwriting had too much unique flair and details to be discounted. So I went in with some middling expectations, and I left getting blown out of the water. And indeed, Hozier set such a high bar in his brand of blues rock and soul that it's not surprising few people even tried to follow him. Not only was that self-titled debut one of the best albums of 2014, but it also produced Jackie and Wilson, which to this day remains my favorite song of 2014. And going back to that album years later, I find myself awestruck how well it holds up. The huge low-end smolder balancing off some terrific melodic hooks in the guitar and organ, the rich diversity of tones, and that's before you get Hozier's brand of overwritten but understated melodrama, drenched in the iconography of the past, but refreshingly modern in a lot of its sentiments. I'd place that self-titled project in the same category as an album like, say, Dolls of Highland by Kyle Craft, in a fusion of textured old-school rock with contemporary ideas. But where Kyle Craft was able to crank up a really strong follow-up last year with Full Circle Nightmare, Hozier's more deliberate, mostly because he had the flexibility to rely on a monster hit and the frankly stunning of numbers of albums that he sold in an era where albums don't sell. So while it was cooler than most on his EP follow-up last year, Nina Cried Power, it's really damn good, just not quite great. I had really high hopes for Wasteland, baby. I was a little bit less enthused to discover that he included a few songs from that EP on this album, and yet not my favorite from that project, Moment Silence, Common Tongue, which was on my short list of songs that very nearly made my top 50 songs of 2018. But hey, we've been waiting damn near 5 years for this, so what do we get from Wasteland, baby? So you know what? I was prepared to come into this review guns a-blazing in retaliation at Pitchfork for the disinterested hatchet job they did in their review, which seemed to miss out on most of Hozier's fundamental appeal and brand it as just another project to chase another hit, which, given this project was released a comfortable 5 years since Take Me to Church, didn't seem to have much support in its premise alone. And then I heard the album, and on some level, I at least understood where Pitchfork might have been coming from, because Wasteland, baby, is absolutely a step down from the self-titled album, and mostly seems to be rooted in choices that take Hozier further from the sounds that made him such a powerful and unique presence. And even then, I wouldn't say it's him who's the biggest problem here, especially when you can tell the label's now stuck with the impossible task of matching a surprise hit that moved over 1 million units in the 2010s. It was never going to live up to the self-titled debut, and some of the choices they made were the wrong ones. So okay, that raised the ugly question of whether this is a sophomore slump. And yet again, I'm not sure I can precisely say that, at least when it comes to Hozier himself. In terms of sheer range and smoldering power, he is an incredible force of personality behind the mic, able to balance out the rough-edged, bluesy smolder to a full-throated soul bellow to a husky folk timbre. As a sheer talent behind the microphone, there are few who can match his presence or versatility. And while there might be a few points on this project where the vocal pickup can feel a shade bit too lo-fi or muddy in the layering thanks to a bit too much reverb, that's always been a part of his atmosphere and presence, adding an organic, earthy swell, even to the songs where the production doesn't really stick the landing. And you know what? We might as well dig in deep to that, because if I were to highlight my first major issue, and really the biggest issue with this album, it comes in the production. Unlike the self-titled release, which was entirely produced by Rob Kirwan, this album has the majority of credits from British mega producer Marcus Drobs, and that meant a departure from the heavy, smoldering grooves that balance their low-end royal with blues rock crunch and some sizzling organs. You know, the whole damn reason why Hozier stood out in the first place, and he swapped it out instead in the classic example of utterly missing the point that too much music, both indie and otherwise, has suffered this decade. The drums and the percussion are given a lot more presence and higher placement in the mix, which forces the melodies, both in the multi-track vocals, the guitars, the organs, the keyboards, the strings, to compete with the clattering hand claps or the louder beats while neglecting the bass lines that provide the real connective tissue for those beats, especially as the percussion and bass isn't as cleanly blended as it should be. And this leads to mixes that are more choppy and staccato, which not only don't flatter Hozier's smoother vocal tone as much, but they're also meaning that the melodic hooks are stuff competing against them, and the comparisons to a lot of mainstream folk rock and blues that Hozier had mostly sidestepped, they're sadly a lot more evident and pertinent. And you know what? I do blame Marcus Strauss for this, because he did much of the same to Kings of Leon on Walls back in 2016, and to Florence and the Machine back in 2015 on How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful. It might have worked for the stomp of Mumford & Sons 8 years ago, or Arcade Fire back in the suburbs in 2010, but it's not working now. It's played out. It doesn't work for Hozier. And what's all the more exasperating is that if you're looking for the thicker blues rock smolder that gave the last album so much momentum, well, most of that isn't as prominent either. Take No Plan, one of the few cuts of the striking bass line at the front of the mix, but it's also stuck opposite a sizzling garage rock sizzle in the lead guitar, much punchier snares and kick drums, and more tacked on liquid flourishes in the guitar line and strings, with little blending to cultivate a real sense of atmosphere that all the instruments go together, and that's before that goopy synth drop over the bridge. I'll at least try to give Ariel Rechtshaid some credit on the 2 songs he produces for a slightly more lo-fi bluesy smolder on Nobody, but the percussion is still the most prominent element in the mix, and the ramshackle approach taken to noise-making Sing, it just doesn't work, even if more of a slapdash approach on the song was kind of part of the point. But even the songs I really love from this album, like the slow burn Movement that I am convinced is one trap remix away from being a killer strip club song, it's got the percussion as the most dominant feature, and that also goes for Almost Sweet Music, and Talk, and especially Sunlight, which is kind of a shame because Sunlight probably has the best hook on the album. Now again, let me stress this isn't precisely a deal maker, mostly because when Hozier is ramping up some sheer raw intensity, there are few that can match the precise timbre of what he delivers, both vocally and in the melodies. As much as I was initially kind of irked that Nina Cried Power and Shrike were included on this album, the former is still a really damn good song with Mavis Staples, and the latter, the more developed arrangement behind Shrike, it is absolutely an improvement. And when Hozier steps towards more of a darker acoustic folk tone like on As It Was, or something as ribald as Dinner and Diatribes, I hear traces of the darker, sleazier side of Hozier that made the first album so damn memorable and potent. Hell, Movement falls in a similar category. But this is where we have to get to the content and a thematic pivot that does feel more accessible, but also on some level a little less interesting. Now, Hozier himself has described this album as a little bit more optimistic and hopeful, a wry smile in desperate circumstances, a title track trying to find moments of love amidst an apocalypse, aiming to be a little bit warmer than the twisted, very Irish Catholic darkness of the self-titled project. And what's kind of frustrating is that my favorite Hozier song, Jackie and Wilson, it works on a similar brand of hope. So why isn't this album quite registering as deeply for me? Well, part of it might be in contrast that there just aren't as many darker, murky songs on this album. He's not referencing Angels of Small Death or rape culture on this record, but it's also because Hozier is framing himself as more of an optimistic figure overall. A track like To Noise-Making Sing is a sort of aspirational moment that not only feels thuddingly on the nose and kind of obvious, but also reflecting a much brighter demeanor that's just not as complex or compelling or interesting, mostly because I keep expecting a curveball that never really comes. I mean, he's still a great songwriter in terms of structuring meter and nuance, although with like my last review with Marianas Trench, he's got a penchant for just repeating words on a hook to fill up space, a shortcut that as a songwriter he just doesn't need to take. I just wish that he leaned into the human frailty and the failings that add so much texture both for him and the girls in the picture. And because when he does, we get some great moments. I love how Nobody paints the messy flaws of both partners and how that can often be the most attractive quality for them both, or the messy stumble home on As It Was, where the damnation is for his neglect just around the corner, how easy he can step into the incubus side on Talk and is really quite convincing. Then you get the transgression of Sexual Release across B, and especially on Dinner and Diatribes, which is a pretty damn great song just about blowing past bad parties to go screw. Honestly, there's a part of me that wishes there was a little bit more thematic cohesion here, perhaps maybe the added slice of insight into the irony of so many flawed people and sinful people finding solace amidst larger calamity as being worth saving. But Hozier's taken that as a given, and I'm honestly kind of okay with that. Although for as much as a music and classics nerd as he is, I wish the references and symbolism on this project slid in a little bit more cleanly. Sometimes, like on Nina Cried Power, they can feel a bit heavy-handed. But as a whole, look, folks, I really want to love this album, but the truth is that you can tell with more hands and eyes there was more of a push to make this accessible to a wider audience. They kind of had to live up to Hozier, the self-titled album, and I'm not sure that was possible. Which, again, it's such a label move because it combines the delusion that the existing fans won't hear the difference and that this is the only way to build growth rather than build on the strengths you already have. Now, granted, Hozier's more optimistic direction, he was going there already from the themes, but with a richer and more balanced sonic palette, it would have registered far better, and it's kind of exasperating that so much of it was compromised for accessibility. I blame Marcus Draws most for this, but Hozier moved enough units, and he did take enough time that he could have pushed back against this if he wanted to. As such, I'm thinking a very strong 7 out of 10, and a recommendation. Hell, if you like Take Me to Church and you're looking for more of an accessible point to hop on board, this might be the ticket. But if you're going off the self-titled album, temper your expectations, and I hope that Hozier's able to realize his strengths going on the next one, and that it doesn't take another 5 years in order to get there. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Another longer review, but I had a lot to say, and again, this was kind of disappointment. I really wanted this to be a lot better. But hey, if you want to buy or stream the album, links are down there below, and I got the poll up there for all you diehard Hozier fans to tell me how wrong I am, even though I really don't think I am. I think the self-titled album is still better. Still a fantastic album. I still think this is good, just not great. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. I'm going to be fidgeting with the new light setup that I've got going on right now, so if that's why it looks a little bit different, that's why. That might be happening over the next couple of weeks, we'll see. But hey, if you guys actually want to help support the channel, link to my Patreon right over there. Happy to see you over there. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.